Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Sam Glassenberg. I lead the casual games group within Playtech. Playtech successfully acquired Funtactics, also known as FTX Games, a little over 6 months ago. Since then, the team at Funtactics has been hard at work within Playtech, scaling up our movie and our TV-based games efforts. We'll talk about some of that a little bit later. So both before the acquisition and after, our team has been publishing free-to-play games based on some of the biggest films and TV shows of the last several years. Hunger Games, Mission Impossible, Narcos, and many, many more. By now, I think we've done deals with just about all the major studios in Hollywood. There are a few more we haven't announced yet. As for myself, I've actually spent my career making movie-based games. My first gig in the entire industry was as an animator at LucasArts. I was hired to fly spaceships out of college, which was a lot of fun. I was an engineer. I was working as an artist, and I got to see firsthand this like incredible creativity and depth that goes into creating one of these epic film universes. And what was really cool about working at LucasArts wasn't just that we were working on Episode 2 games in the Star Wars universe, but I was really thrown into the deep end. I was working with some of the most talented artists and storytellers on the planet. And lucky for me, like being plunged in head first made me realize something, which was that no matter how long I would work at being an artist myself, I would never ever be as good as them. I would never be able to come up with these stories and universes as compelling as the stories created by people like George Lucas. But maybe, and this is what I learned when I learned working there, I could use my engineering smarts, right, to be able to help an artist or a prolific storyteller realize their vision for the universe that they want to create. And eventually sort of use my ability to manage people who were far smarter than I was with better art, design, and engineering skills to go ahead and expand these universes, Star Wars and whatnot, to be a part of something much bigger, to be a part of Hunger Games, to be a part of Narcos. And this is what gets me excited to wake up and go to work in the morning. So years later, after I did a 6-year stint at Microsoft, I joined Funtactics as CEO. And our management team basically turned the company around into a big success story for the Israeli games industry and also the first free-to-play game company focused completely on movie IP. So quick aside, 8 years ago, I just want to sort of do a flashback. So 8 years ago, the Israeli games industry looked very, very, very different than it does today. Back then, it was like a really big deal when an executive from, a games industry executive from the US came to join an Israeli company. Now that happens all the time. But back then it was a big deal. And so I was asked 8 years ago to keynote the Israeli Game Developer Conference, which I think was called Game IS at the time. And it was the whole thing, it was maybe 50, 100 people. It was in a university lecture hall. And what they did was they asked me to provide a vision of what the Israeli games industry might look like many years later. What does success look like? And so one example that I gave in this talk, this is an actual slide from 8 years ago, was that we would have a major international game conference in Tel Aviv, and it would be attended by games industry executives from around the world. And this is actually the same slide from the talk. I have this disclaimer, CEO's conception, not an actual event. I said there would be 1,000 attendees, and at the end it ended up being 2015 instead of 2013. It ended up being Casual Connect and not GDC Israel, but here, I think there are 1,300 attendees in a whole multitude of tracks. So I just, I hope everyone's as excited as I am how utterly awesome it is, right, to be giving a talk 8 years later at a conference that back then would really have only been like a crazy dream. So everyone pat yourselves on the back for creating an industry here. We can do a round of applause. There we go. That's even better. You can't really hear people hitting themselves on the back. All right, so 8 years ago, I joined Funtactics. We turned it into the first free-to-play game company focused on movie IP. And really what we're trying to do is realize the ultimate fan fantasy through games. Now, movie-based games have a pretty dark history. When I grew up, movie-based games were the best, were awesome. Right, some of the best games I played when I was a kid were based on movies and TV shows. You had amazing games from LucasArts. You had games like Terminator 2 and Simpsons Arcade. Did anybody play these games? All right, because like in the States, you ask people to raise hands, and everybody would raise their hands. And these games also really push the envelope, right? If you look at, I remember when I was at Microsoft, Chronicles of Riddick: Escape from Butcher Bay was one of the first Xbox games that actually like did normal mapping on characters. We were actually doing innovation in movie-based games. And then around 2010, things really took a turn for the worst. Basically, there are a lot of reasons for this. One of them is AAA game production pipelines for big console games. It was stretching out. It would take 3 years to make a big console game. And movies, for decades, they always take 12 months. It's a fixed 12-month production schedule. So if you're making a movie-based game in sync with the film, chances are, right, you've got to make that game in a third of the time that you have to make a non-movie-based console game. And the biggest factor in the failure of movie-based games was this sort of focus on short-term corporate profit. 10 years ago, the big game publishers realized that the success of a movie-based game didn't only correlated to the success of the movie. It had absolutely nothing to do with the game's Metacritic score, how good the actual game was. So in other words, if the movie was a box office success, fans would go ahead and buy a crappy game. And the box is what mattered, right? Not what was inside the box. And so publishers, they got to cutting budgets and cutting schedules, and eventually around 2011, it got to the point where no matter how excited you were about the movie, you knew that the game was going to suck. And it was going to offer a fraction of the content that you would expect from a similarly priced console game, right, that wasn't based on a movie. And so the market wisened up, and in exchange for maybe a few quarters of increased profit, the movie-based games business completely destroyed itself. It was very, very ugly. The movie-based games business shrunk to a fraction of its former self. The revenue dropped 42% in 1 year alone. And so it was a big disaster. And then came free-to-play. And free-to-play really sort of changed, we'll call it the triumphant redeemer of movie-based games. Now, free-to-play gaming has had this sort of controversial impact on a lot of game genres, but I would argue that when you're talking about movie-based games, the impact has been resoundingly positive, and that's for one simple reason. It forces the game developer, it forces the licensee to make a good game. Because if you make a movie-based game and you drive tens of millions of movie fans into the game and the game sucks, they're going to leave, and they're going to leave before they spend any money. And so now the power is back in the hands of the fans. And this is actually a really good thing, right? It actually forces the game developer to work closely with the creator of the IP to create something that's authentic and isn't just a total afterthought, because the fans will detect that. They'll detect if you just cookie cutter churn something out. And for you, the developer, if you get this right, the benefits are huge. Movie IP, if you can deploy it correctly, directly solves and addresses all the biggest problems that free-to-play game developers face, right? Discoverability, virality, revenue. These are all the big challenges that we face in free-to-play, and games and movie IP addresses all of it. So you're basically tapping into this huge audience of existing fans that's already predisposed, right? They're already ready to love your game before they've even played it, right? And they're going to recommend it to everybody they know. And we've seen this. We have brought tens of millions of players into games before we have spent a dime on user acquisition. Platform providers, Apple, Google, they want to surface games that are going to appeal to a big, wide audience on their devices, right? So recognizable IP, it opens that door. And so they'll take a look at your game. Editorial is much more likely to take a look at your game. The game still has to be great, but IP will get your game noticed. And so all of the games we have ever launched, have all been featured on every platform they have ever launched on. Just to give you an idea. And when you do start spending money on user acquisition, what you find is that your cost of user acquisition is 20 to 50% less than it would be for a comparable original IP game in the same genre, right? And why is that? Because when users recognize a movie, they recognize an IP, they click. You get a higher click rate or tap rate, and that results in a lower cost of user acquisition. And what we found is that benefit actually carries all the way through the new user funnel. We've actually A/B tested the impact of if you put in the likeness of a main character from the movie, like within the first 30 seconds, we will actually measure the impact on our funnel, on our metrics. And this literally like double-digit positive impact just from putting the picture of a movie character early on in the game. And we've had fans rally behind our game so hard that they would they outvoted Clash of Clans, right, to give Hunger Games the Webby Award. Narcos has been out for 2 months. It's rapidly climbing the top grossing charts. So movie IP really helps. Hunger Games, this is the official map of Panem. How many people have seen the Hunger Games? All right, most of you. So this is the most anticipated piece of lore in the entire Hunger Games universe, right? In the history of any movie book franchise. And this, like, you know all the locations. You know that Hunger Games takes place in a post-apocalyptic North America, but where are all these places? Where is District 12 in the capital? Nobody knows. And so it was not this map of Panem was not revealed in the movie. It wasn't revealed in the books or a comic book. It was revealed in a video game, a free-to-play game played on Facebook, a game that was actually built here in Israel, which is also very cool. So this is the kind of value you get to unlock for your players in the game. And so Mission Impossible, we launched all these revealed all these movie gadgets and locations that we actually revealed in the game 6 weeks before the movie came out. And what we find is a lot of the actors are actually really excited to be in their first video game. So they'll talk it up to their fans on social media. And this, in addition to being lots of fun, also drives lots of installs. So there are a lot of benefits. And because the development cycles for a mobile game, right, is still comfortably within the window of time it takes to make a movie, when you start work on the game, you already have the movie script, right? You already have concept art. You might even have an early cut of the film. And if the movie, for example, is animated, you can actually get access to the assets from the animation studio themselves, which gives your game that extra shot of authenticity, because it's literally the exact same character and the same asset in your game. So you get friends, fame, fans, fortune. Why doesn't everybody make movie-based games? And the reason is because it's the challenges and the risks are immense. Getting a deal done for one of these games is really difficult, and that is just the beginning. The majority of movie-based game deals, the actual contracts, don't actually result in launched games. Executing on this requires a lot of experience, a lot of focus, and when it goes wrong, it gets really, really ugly. So we'll talk a little bit about the deal. Lawyers love talking about at movie deals at game conferences because the minutia of these deals is the most exciting part of their job. I'm not going to take that joy away from them, but I'll talk about a few of the business considerations. So the biggest question I always get is, how much do you pay to the studios to get an IP? And the answer is, of course, it depends, which is an answer I always hate. But so then people ask me, okay, Sam, what does Fantactics pay in royalties to the movie studios? And the answer is somewhere between 5 and 50%, depending on what. So coming up with the right deal structure means finding the sort of happy medium between the needs of everybody involved. The biggest factor are things like upfront payments. In some cases, this is rarer now, but a studio will actually participate in the development of a game in a co-fund basis. In this case, you might be because the studio is investing, you might be paying back 50% or more in royalties to the studios. This is happening less and less now because these divisions within the movie studios don't even have budget. Like, they can't even spend money on making games. They're designed to earn money for the studio. But if you're if you're a small studio, you don't have a lot of capital, this can be a good option for you if you've got a great game that's a good fit. And in the reverse side, if you spend money up front and you pay a minimum guarantee, that often, that's designed to lower the ongoing royalty percentage that you pay to the studio. And so, how do you calculate the royalty that you pay, right? Some people say, all right, well, 20%. The actual number doesn't mean anything, because is that 20% of the gross revenue? Is that 20% of the net revenue? Here, you really have to understand the business model and sort of the P&L for your game. Because if you have a bad royalty structure, it will literally destroy your business model and might take a profitable game and make it very not profitable. So here's an example with some pictures. So let's say when you do royalties, when you're paying royalties to the studio, you don't get to deduct your marketing costs. Let's say you negotiate a deal where it's a 20% royalty and marketing is up to you. So here in your free-to-play game, here's your LTV, your average lifetime value per user. And as we all know, what you do in free-to-play is you start spending money on acquiring users, and you continue to do that, right, until over time as your cost of user acquisition increases. And you keep doing that until it reaches the value of your user, the lifetime value of a user, and that's when you stop, right? You've maximized the profit from the game. And so what happens is, if let's say you you can't deduct user acquisition costs from your royalties. What if you have to, if you basically have to pay your royalties from the gross revenue? What'll end up happening is all of a sudden you've got this big group of potentially a huge audience of players that you could have acquired and everyone would have made a profit on, but now you can't acquire them because you would acquire them at a loss. And so these are lost users, it's lost revenue, it's lost profit for everybody, right? Including the movie studio. It's lose-lose. And so this is how these are the considerations you have to take into account when you're negotiating the deal. Studios in general hate deducting anything from their royalties, right? And so, this is the way they've done licensing for 50 years. And so it's a tricky balance to achieve. Lots of other considerations when you're negotiating a movie or TV based game. Music, actor likeness, exclusivity. There are 5 solutions to every problem. There are all sorts of techniques that you can use to break through an impasse in negotiation. But what you realize, the first thing you realize after you sign the deal is that the first thing you realize after the actual deal closes is that the deal doesn't matter at all. The majority, like I said, the majority of movie-based game deals don't result in launched games. And that's because, if you think about it, like the next time you look, once you've signed that contract, right, the next time you look at it, it should be when you're calculating your first royalty check to the movie studio after the game has launched. If you're checking that contract beforehand, it means you're trying to take the studio to court, and then your game is never going to see the light of day. Your lawyer will not help you launch your game. Your agent, if you hire one, if your licensing agent, will not help you launch your game. The only you and your team and the relationship that you build with the studio and the movie director can make sure your game launches successfully. And the movie business is undergoing a lot of change right now. It's not uncommon for the entire team that you work with, like all the people you work with at the movie studio and the licensing department, to get reorged or fired. And then you don't have a line of communication. So you have to be working with all the different groups at the studio to close your deal and ship your game. This is, picture this nightmare. This is an excerpt from an actual $12 million lawsuit filed by a European game publisher against a major movie studio. And what they claimed was that the movie studio took $1 million from the game publisher as a minimum guarantee. They encouraged the developer to invest in the game. And since that time, this is what they say, it has been virtually impossible to communicate with anybody at the movie studio with any knowledge of the game. So literally, they invested all this money, and what they claim is nobody answered. They paid the studio $1 million, and then nobody answered the phone. Right? This is actually from a real lawsuit. And so, while this was happening, the Funtactics team was actually working with that same movie studio, and we shipped multiple titles with them. They were an incredible partner and one of the most forward-thinking studios in the space. So we never encountered anything like this ourselves, and we've seen a lot of reorganizations. But this is why maintaining and investing in those relationships, having people on the ground in Hollywood this is one of those things that's really hard to do remotely. You actually need to have somebody on the ground and build those relationships. The most important factor in all of this is creative approvals. The IP owner always has final say on creative approvals. Always. You will never be able to demand a creative approval must be given within a week or else it's automatically approved. That will never, ever happen. This is their IP, and under no circumstances can you add characters to the universe, can you extend the lore, add the story, or do anything without their permission, right? This is part of the risk. And so this is one of the toughest realities that developers or about movie-based games really need to come to terms with, that it's someone else's IP, it's not yours. And so this is where movie-based games go to die. For a major film or book franchise, keeping the movie director happy, keeping the author happy, right? That is the most important thing for the studio. They have hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars tied up in keeping that they need to keep that director happy, right? Because they're investing a huge amount in these movies. And they will gladly burn your deal to avoid pissing off the relationship with the filmmakers. So especially for Israelis, I know that you have an idea for exactly what the movie director should do to make the movie better and why the movie director's last movie wasn't good and how you could have made it better. Keep your mouth shut, because if you make a big deal out of it, your game will not ship. So restrain yourself. If you can't Send in an American, or even somebody with a British accent. That goes even better. So your relationship with the IP owner is crucial. You have to demonstrate you understand their IP. You have to listen to, you actually have to implement their feedback and show them that you've done that. They're actually an amazing resource. They have this huge universe in their head, right? Only a small window of it do they get to show during a movie, right? Or put down in a book. And so you, as the game developer, as a designer, as an artist, you're giving them the opportunity, right, to explore the rest of that universe in their head and to share that vision with their fans, right? But it's their fans. It's not your fans. So you always have to prioritize your production, your game production. So the riskiest stuff like actor likeness, right, gets done first. And are ready for approval. So we actually built a very specialized production pipeline to handle this. And if you do this right, you're revealing the map of Panem in your game. If you do this wrong, at best, your game is going to be delayed until after the movie comes out, and at worst, you are going to court and you have no game. Your contract won't help you. Things like the map of Panem, the actor videos promoting the game, none of that is in the contract. They will never ever put that in the contract, right? That all comes from the relationship that you build with the actors and with the movie studio. We're running out of time, so I'll skip some of the specific approaches on. We can talk later if you have questions about how we do UA and how we do things like geo betas when you're revealing the secrets of the movie in your game. The answer is it's really tough, but. We basically, this is a cycle that we repeat both when the movie launches and then when it comes out on DVD and in digital download. So basically, this free-to-play game, right, because it's free, it can serve as this awesome ultimate marketing tool for the movie. You're going to bring in tens of millions of players. You're going to motivate them to share with friends. So from the standpoint of movie marketing, right, it's this, like, a free-to-play game just kicks a trailer's ass. It is the most useful resource in their arsenal, but you have to be really careful because the marketing plan for a movie comes together really, really late, far after you've started working on your game. So if the marketing team decides they want to position the movie a little differently, they decide that, it's different from how you present it in the game. So for example, if your game targets men and they decide they want to focus marketing on women, or, your game is very violent and they want to position the movie as more cerebral, marketing is not going to let your game confuse the market. So you've got to keep a pulse on that. Do this right, you're showing off the game at the Hollywood press junket. Do this wrong, and at best, the studio will completely silence any PR or news about your game. At worst, they'll delay the launch. So if this all seems daunting, it's really exciting. It's also a little bit daunting. As a developer, you can work with a publisher that's done it before. So at Playtech Casual, we work with developers all over the world on different movie and TV-based titles. If you've got a great game, it's got great KPIs, we'll work with you to find the right film or TV show, or work with somebody else. There are a lot of publishers out there now that have specific experience working with movie-based games. And so if you're looking for a publisher relationship and you want to do something around IP, definitely work with a publisher that has experience doing it and can help you out with the Hollywood relationships. If you do this right, you get to blow past all the major challenges of releasing a free-to-play game on any platform. You get to start with a super excited audience. You get excited sponsors, excited platform partners. Apple and Google are excited out of the gate, which gives your awesome game the visibility that it needs and the opportunity to be successful. Thank you.
What do you think that when a movie studio could accumulate the expertise in-house and they would publish the games by themselves?
So that's an interesting question. Movie studios building games in-house. There's a cycle that happens where movie studios, they're licensing. There's a cycle. If you look at sort of the history of movie-based games, what you'll see is what happens is movie studios are realizing, wow, our licensees are making so much money off of games. We make movies. Games are like movies. We can do that. And then they hire a whole lot of people and they spend a whole lot of money and it ends in disaster. Even like the successful, like Disney did a great job at this. And even then, recently they canned almost their entire interactive team and they're just doing licensing. Even if you look at LucasArts, right, which was for years, LucasArts the only games that they were able to make profitably were the games they actually didn't make in-house. They were the games they licensed out. The main game I worked on at LucasArts was called Jedi Starfighter, and the reason it came out was because the first Starfighter game was like the first in years, the first profitable game that had come out of LucasArts that they had made in-house. So immediately they're like, all right, we got to do this again. Let's make another one. We got another movie coming out. And even so, like then the next few just did not perform. So generally speaking, the licensing model has proven more successful for movie studios.
Any other questions?
Yeah, hello. I have a question. How to feel the line between good game license and bad game license? Because you want to be director be fine and the fans be fine.
That is a great question. So how do you pick the right IP? It's a little bit of an art and a science. There are a lot of factors that we look for. We look for a big and growing fan audience. We look for a big universe, right? There are a lot of movies that really don't have a lot to them beyond what you see in the 90 minutes. And then there's Star Wars, right, which extends forever. And so we're always looking for things that have a lot of characters, that have a lot of backstory, and that we can see is gaining momentum and excitement with the audience. I remember when we first did Hunger Games, right? Nobody had heard of it was no one had really heard about it in the game development community, but among like teens and tweens, it was the hottest thing. And so we were just watching, Twitter and Facebook and all this like crazy social momentum, right? When still like nobody had heard about like, what was this thing about kids killing kids? And there was a lot of scrutiny about it. So at the end of the day, it ended up being this like one of the biggest movie franchises in history. And so, And so it had a lot of the elements that we were looking for, and at the same time, you could clearly see that it was growing very quickly in popularity and not slowing down. But, there's a lot of that analysis that goes into figuring out what's a good fit. And also, more importantly, what's a good fit for the game itself, right? There are, I've always wished that I could find the right game genre that fits with a romantic comedy, right? But it's really hard to do. So it's a combination of if you've got a great game, you actually have to find a movie that fits both for the game mechanic and for the target demographic, right? Because there's certain game mechanics that work really well on certain demographics that has to fit with a target demographic for the movie or the TV show.
And the last one question.
My question is about acquiring the movie talent into the game, because it is only half of the story to get the license from the filmmakers from the movie studio to make a game based on movies, but the second story is to get actors to license their faces being in the game. So what is your advice about that? Right.
So actor likeness. So typically actor likeness is negotiated as part of the deal. So certain things, like I said, is so actually getting the actors to participate in marketing, that is up to them. But usually the actor likeness has already, when the actor is signed on to do the movie, they're also signing a contract with the studio saying, these are the rules for my likeness. So either, so the more senior experienced actors, they get to approve everything. And then usually sometimes the younger junior actors, they don't necessarily, sometimes they don't actually have any approval whatsoever. It's entirely up to the studio. So it depends. But that is a really important question to ask up front. Because you'll say, all right, well, hey, what likeness does it include? And, often they'll say, we'll tell you later. And you really need to have that broken out and clearly see exactly what is involved and who gets to approve what, to understand, because sometimes there's a chance that you might not get a certain actor's likeness in your game if they have, approval about any use whatsoever. And if that's the case, you need to take that into account when you decide whether or not to do the deal.
Thank you, Sam.
All right, thank you.